When I was young, early teen years, maybe, my father gave me my first cell phone. Him and my mother came to the first agreement I'd seen them come to in a long time. But then again, they didn't talk near enough to agree on much but their silence. They agreed that my dad would give me the phone and my mother would pay for it. She'd do that with the help of my father's child support payments, so it was even. The payments for the phone weren't very much. It was a pretty shitty phone. It was a track phone LG 305C. I urge you to look that up. Actually, they're the perfect size for how little my hands were. But it had Tetris, Bejeweled. It was a touch screen, so I was contented. Now that I had some connection to the outside world, that content feeling went to elation. I was so happy. You know, I wasn't some shut in. Like I got out. I went outside. I went to public school. All that. I just didn't have any out of school connectivity. But this phone was my ticket to that. But considering I didn't have many friends that wanted to talk to me outside of school, and the 6 year age gap between me and my little brother of a different father made playtime hardly interesting, my main connection was my dad. My dad lived an hour and some change away from me, which to a kid who can't drive was basically across the country. He still does live that far, but adulthood has a way of truncating distance. At the time, I was really into trying to be a stand up comic. I had read the book I Funny about the kid in the wheelchair who also wants to be a stand up comic. And through the power of friendship and perseverance, he does, and he makes it big. And truthfully, for as a kid, and maybe even as an adult, that book was really heavy. It dealt with grief, comfort in disability, anxiety, the likes. So naturally, like any neurodivergent kid taking in any piece of enjoyable media, I wanted to be just like the main character. I wanted to live in that world and be. I think his name is Jamie. But since I wasn't creative or funny, or rather wasn't in the practice of writing stand up after my pre algebra homework, I would just steal one liners from famous comedians and text them to my dad. It didn't really work, considering it's an oral medium, really dependent on its delivery to work. So you can imagine how unfunny it was over text. But a child's imagination is a magical thing. I still enjoyed doing it. It gave me a reason to text my dad, who I had quite the affinity for as a boy. You see, he was the cool dad. He was dysfunctional, sure, but he was cool. He let me stay up late, eat snacks, swear, all the fun stuff you enjoyed as a kid, or at least that I enjoyed doing as a kid. I liked going there because I was able to kind of let go of the restrictiveness of home and just be me. Or rather, try my hardest to be my dad. See, me and my father had this really fucked up codependency thing that I've, done my best to unpack as a grown man. You see, I tried to morph myself into him, not only because I idolized him, but because I wanted him to really like me, which sounds crazy now. Like, I wanted to box, just like he did, so I could show him just how hard I could fight. But I was not a fighter. I still really am not, you know? But I didn't want him to leave, for me to not see him for years on end, so I did my best to prevent that. And he would let me do just about whatever I wanted because he didn't want me to deem him uncool and therefore have me just stop coming over ever. And of course, there was no way to really communicate that then, that neither of us needed to do that. So we didn't. And we spent years fighting for each other's affection that we'd already won when we had no reason to. We still haven't talked about it now that we are both adults, but things are different now as I've grown, as all things are. But when the 2 day every other every other weekend, excuse my mush mouth, when the 2 day every other weekend trips would end, I had to go back home, and that meant loneliness and fear before I really even knew what those words meant. But the track phone LG305C, I really hope I'm not butchering that, changed that, you know? I didn't have to be miles and miles away. I could just be a text away. And that feeling, well, I would have jarred it if I could. Compartmentalized it somewhere where it never had to change, to grow, or to be altered. I'd send him my jokes. He'd tell me they were funny, and I'd go right back to Google to look up more. And if you've had one of those phones, you know just how long that takes to Google stuff. Especially to Google a text document. Like, that shit takes forever. But I was committed. Committed to making him see me and talk to me. But when my dad stopped calling back, stopped making plans to pick me up, and stopped having enough money to make child support, my mom got me a new phone. One that she had full dominion over. She wasn't willing to have me be let down without it being on her terms. So she bought me the new phone. It was a flip phone of the name I don't remember. Had buttons and everything. And she stopped paying for the track phone. Now, I wasn't too heartbroken. I still had a phone. It wasn't like I was losing that, but it was a bit of a downgrade. But regardless, I was grateful. I had a phone, so I wasn't destroyed. I wasn't distraught. But the buttons did make it hard to send like lengthier texts, which they're not made for that, so that makes sense. But it made my stand-up, like, side hustle in front of my one main audience near impossible. Or, at the very least, unfeasible. It wasn't like I never saw him, of course, but I saw him less, which was tough. But fortunately, my mom let me keep the old phone, which for me was a crazy thing. She figured it had no use, I assume, so why not let me keep it? Even though all of my electronics were only to be used under parental permission, this one thing managed to fly under that radar. So at night, I would sit up in bed, playing Bejeweled or Tetris or something, and just joyous of the feeling of freedom I felt in such a small gesture. But every once in a while, I'd open the messenger in an act of desperation, maybe, or maybe a fundamental misunderstanding of how phones work. And I'd text my dad, praying for a text back. Usually just an innocuous hello or a silly pun, something, anything. Because it obviously wasn't going to send, the message just would bounce back to my phone. But it looked like my dad had sent it this time. Like my father was on the other end, just copying me in some fucked up mockery. I knew that wasn't the case. But a child's imagination is a magical thing. But I realized what I had the ability to do. See, because those texts would just bounce back to my phone, I basically got to puppet my dad's voice back to me, like an echo. So I'd tell him a joke. He'd tell it right back. I'd tell him how funny it was, just so he could say it back. I would tell him I love him, just so I could read him saying it right back. I'd have full conversations, basically, with myself. He'd get the chance to comfort me without him knowing it. He had the chance to be the stand up, emotionally available father without having to say anything. I did it all for him. I mean, as a kid, you know best what you need, I guess. Of course, that kind of thing doesn't last forever. Fantasies die. Every kid stops believing in Santa, and when your birthday's on Christmas, which mine happens to be, that usually happens quick. I stopped texting the ghost phone with my father's name on it, and it just stopped being a thing. And I settled on house phone calls as much as we could. As I grew up, communication with him got a little easier. I got an iPhone. It was allowed a few more freedoms, though not many, and my dad started trying a little harder. Life on that front got a little easier, though really only on that front. Of course, we never talked about it, but of course not. I took up drawing, music, writing, and a few other creative fields so I could have the feeling of creating something, cultivating something that was mine, that I didn't have to speak for, or that I didn't have to puppet back to me or affirm to myself. I found solace in knowing that I could say something and have the voice be mine and have that be enough. But now, as my little brother has kind of become his own, he's picking up art too, drawing specifically. Now, the relationship with his father remains largely untested, while my relationship with his father remains hardly intact. But my relationship with my brother, and as well as my little sister, I'd like to think it's pretty strong. He likes to show me his art sometimes, and he'll send me pictures of it, and he'll send me TikToks, and oftentimes I'll tell him it looks great. And we'll talk about music and movies. Sometimes I forget to respond. Sometimes he doesn't hear from me for a while or doesn't see me. Sometimes I wonder if he ever talks to me, through me, like an echo. I mean, a child's imagination is a magical thing.